Good morning, Jenny White. Good morning, everybody at Rope.
I just thought it was funny. I was just going to see if you were going to say anything or not.
Sure.
How are you this morning?
Pretty good. Pretty good. How about you, Jenny?
It is a beautiful day. I mean, truly, I'm looking out the window. I don't see any smoke on the horizon. Smoke on the horizon.
Smoke on the horizon. Oh, that's funny.
No, and it's beautiful. There's hardly any wind. It's actually a really pretty day. I think this is nice. It's spring.
Does that mean no one's messing with our weather? There's no
oh no, I didn't say that.
Modification or anything like that. No, I mean just happening today. Maybe they took the day off and this is how it's supposed to be. Just
Maybe
nice.
I got this picture the other day. I'll have to put it up some point. It's on my phone. And I was working out by the greenhouse and I looked up and there's a checkerboard in the sky. I was like, For all of those who think weather modification is not happening, here's your checkerboard for today.
Well, for all those, see, you have to know the right words. We've had We've had Julianne on. We've had Julianne on, and she talks about the buzzwords. Well, the buzzword when it comes to that is stratospheric aerosol injection. Or there's two different ones. There's SRA and SRI or SAI. But if you say chemtrail, then you're crazy. But if you you go type in stratospheric aerosol injection, you're going to see 30 years worth of research that everybody loves it.
See, I haven't done it, but that's really interesting. But that goes back to the COVID thing and the fact that remember when during COVID they would hide things under tags, right? So if you didn't put it in just right, you couldn't see what it was.
Oh yeah.
So I think they do that all the time. I think there's much internet media modification. I think I just made that up. IMM, internet media modification.
But if go ahead.
I was going to say if you put in something else, but I wasn't fast enough to think of the word. I couldn't make it up that fast. So I'm going with internet media modification. I like that. That's a new one. IMM. Yeah. But people do that all the time. They erase bad stuff off the internet. They change things on the internet and people don't get it. I mean,
well, that's the hard thing is, there's no, and I guess that's where the government comes in. They want to be that curator or their partnership with big tech to be the curator. So then they can say, spin the narrative how they want. I mean, that's the good and bad about the internet. Everything's out there, but what can you trust, what can you not trust. You have
Yeah.
to have a lot of discernment with a lot of stuff.
And I think part of that discernment is, I mean, I personally think a huge chunk of it is, well, I think all of it's from God, but I mean, the part that you have access to is your common sense, right? You can develop your common sense. It's not just a gift, you have to develop it. And I just don't think we like it anymore. I just don't think we like common sense because it would crush our feels, you know?
That's where, and I'm glad we're having Mary on today to kind of talk about common sense and government
Cover-ups.
government sponsored whatever, you can fill in the blank, terrorism, modification, genetic modification, research, all those good deals. But maybe when you say common sense, I always think of like when I was a kid, you think of like the smartest kids in your class that are just like off the charts, but they have no common sense. And you
Yes.
hear about all these scientists and all these people, they literally have no common sense. But there must be maybe a correlation there with, I don't know, maybe spirituality or something that, in my opinion, that maybe, gives you a little more common sense, just being a little more moral based person than just someone that's total trust the science
That's an
100%.
interesting thing to, I mean, we can't do it today, but that would be an interesting thing to develop on that thought process, because there's at least one person I know of right off the top of my head who has no real religious underpinning, but she's extremely, extremely smart. I mean, mathematically smart, engineering smart, all that kind of stuff. But then she doesn't see things for what they are.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And
just the fact of like what we're going to talk about today, and I'm so glad we're talking about this today, because I have another little list of things that I made this morning that I just want to put the words out there. I just want to put the words out there, and then people can go look into it themselves. But how smart is it to modify things like ticks or whatever, and then I mean, really, just like COVID. And I'm glad that all these doctors are starting to speak out. You got Jay Bhattacharya, who's going to be at the head of NIH now, and he was one of the authors of the Barrington Declaration, and he was pretty heavy against that. So I'm glad stuff's kind of turning around, but I don't
yeah,
know.
but
I would
it's
like to see more common sense in general applied to that kind of stuff. All the modification of everything. There needs to be some serious common sense put in there. Like, do we really need to do that?
do we really need dire wolves again?
Hey, man, maybe maybe we do. I don't know.
I saw Jurassic Park, like all of them, and I seem to remember it didn't end well, but it's just me. All right, let's quit fooling around and bring on our guest this morning, because she's waiting in the wings and raring to go.
Yeah.
Good morning, Mary. How are you?
Good morning. It is a beautiful spring Oklahoma morning, and we're going to see if we can scare people about going outside by the end of this. No, honestly.
Don't scare people. They're already scary enough.
No, that was a complete joke. This is what you were talking about really made me think, we're calling it, do people believe the science? But it's really propaganda. And there's so much research about when big things happen, whether it was the Nazi propaganda or just different things around the world, that you'll hear somewhere between 25 and 30% of the people are able to see through it,
right,
and think through it, and others are not. The majority are not. So there's something there that's different, and this is probably no different. I can tell you, journalists don't like to cover things like this because they don't want to be labeled. But if you approach everything,
you mean labeled as that? Oh, she talked about. You mean that kind of labeling, or
exactly?
Okay.
And the nasty.
Right. You're conspiracy theorist, Mary.
Telling the truth that they don't want to be known to be true.
It's really changing. So this is such an interesting time for truth with this, especially this federal administration coming in and all the leaders that Michael was talking about. So it's good timing. And, we're going to talk about the space where the military industrial complex meets sort of that homeland, the NIH, National Institutes of Health, where those seams are, and where that USAID funding came in. We're learning so much about what our government's been doing for generations that is not benefiting us. It's actually harming our health. And this particular series of stories brings it right back to Oklahoma. Specifically, Oklahomans are at huge risk. So,
well, and I was going to say, you've done another one on ticks. So for everybody who's watching
yes.
this morning, this isn't Mary's first foray into the world of tiny woodland creatures.
No, not at all. And if you'll flip to the slides, I just
Sure.
want to talk about quickly a couple of things that are currently in the news that are just sort of showing us how much has been hidden from us in that place where we're talking about the military, NIH, and USAID. So if you didn't see this, it's a little hard to see, so I'm going to sort of let you know.
Is that 38 million?
Uh-huh. Yes.
Good night. I was trying to decide if that was a comma or a period there in front of the last 3 zeros.
No, just here very recently, within the last week or two, a group called White Coast Waste was able to get a FOIA request about some things that happened with COVID and some funding. So if we go back, and you'll remember, there were journalists that were screaming at the start of the COVID pandemic, we were funding this. Fauci's NIH was funding this, and they were saying it was going through a group called EcoHealth, and then it was going to the lab in Wuhan, China, which is ultimately a CCP military facility. And they were all saying, oh no, oh no. And so you'll see sort of the third entry in this document that shows funding that was hooked to a specific researcher named Ben Hu. And it shows, yes, it was.
I couldn't help it. I just couldn't. I said who? Sorry.
You're okay. So the third line down and the last line show you that from June of 2014 to May of 2019, the NIAID, so that was Fauci's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, sent $3 million through to EcoHealth related to these bat coronavirus emergence research. Okay. At the same time, and they were saying to us, so no, the government had nothing to do with this. Then when that amount of money, the $3 million was revealed, and this is a few years ago, they said, oh, how little you people know about science. $3 million could have never caused this, right? And I'm paraphrasing. And then if you look at the bottom of what was just released, USAID put $38 million in that time frame of 2014 to 2019 at the same time, the exact same time that the NIAID was giving the $3 million, $38 million was going through USAID. So it's almost like the $3 million was a cover. And if you start to understand, and it's all hooked to this one researcher, Ben Hu, who we now know was likely patient 0 in the COVID epidemic. He is the researcher that there's now some pretty significant evidence was the first one to be infected.
Wow.
Right? Big truth coming out. The other thing that's not mentioned here that people need to understand about how much our government can lie to us about health-related issues is this 2014 timeframe was exactly when President Obama ordered the halt to domestic gain-of-function research, right? He said, we're not going to do this on U.S. soil anymore. And everyone thought, we're not going to do this. No. It kept going. It was just off sport.
Which at that time, Mary, that specific project was done over at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill by Dr. Ralph Barrick.
Yes, and that's actually, if you look at the bottom one closely, it says UC Davis, contract from UC Davis. Right there in front of you.
Yeah.
So you are absolutely correct. So now add in that higher education academia level to all of this government military insanity that's happening on our tax dollars, and just this complete network of lies and denials when something goes wrong. This isn't even close to the first time something went wrong. Obama didn't make that order saying we're not doing this on domestic soil anymore for no reason. We had the H1N1, the H5H1. All of those are suspected to be government created. So as Americans, it looks like we'd be pretty healthy if the government would knock it off.
Yeah. Well, and if I can make one more comment on that.
So the next thing, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say real quick, and it's not like Barack Obama said, we're not doing that ever again. We're not doing that anymore. He goes, we're just not going to do that here. We're going to move it over to China. We're still going to do it, but we're just going to move it. I mean, people need to realize, like what you just said, the government is so embedded into this, and they've dedicated so much money to this. They're not stopping. They're not going to stop unless we shine light like this, major light on them, and call them out. So thank you, Mary.
You're welcome. And it even says one of the notes on these payments, these grant payments, says that it's going to international labs, EcoHealth to be sent through international labs. So they're absolutely doing this.
We know. Okay. I was going to mention something really briefly that I think it's really important for people to catch on to. So when our tax dollars go to one place, you said, the National Institutes of Health or Fauci's group got so much money. Yep. But then Fauci's group sent that on to somebody else.
Correct.
So just because we see a spreadsheet that says Fauci was given this much money doesn't mean that's where it ended up.
Exactly. There's likely another tab to that spreadsheet that just shows another path for the funds that you can't see.
So much of this stuff is passed through money.
It is passed through money. And now we're noticing there might be decoy amounts. There's $3 million over here. So you're going to assume that's all it is. It's not. USAID had the ability to shove money through dozens and dozens of NGOs before it came out and landed as non-tax dollars.
Well, so and see, almost really completely untrackable. It's like money laundering. This is the money laundering aspect.
Absolutely. You are correct. So another piece of news that just hit was about the World Military Games. And if you go back to the COVID pandemic, so in 2019, we were told that the first case happened in December in China, happened in December of 2019. Right. And there were a lot of savvy journalists who were saying, no, the World Military Games happened and ended in October of 2019. And that was the world spreader. And if you follow the countries that were there, the pattern of spread of COVID follows that very closely. So these military members came and competed in these games, and then they all fanned out back across the globe. The games were in Wuhan, China, not far from where the Wuhan Institute of Virology is. So we were lied to for many years, and a report was made by the Secretary of Defense. It's a report that's dated December of 2022, but they sandbagged it. It was a couple of years that they hid it. They actually put it out on a website between two completely unrelated pieces of information, almost as though it was always out there. Where have you been? So this has just come out in the last week or two. And the Defense Department now is admitting that 7 members who attended those games had COVID-like symptoms. Of course, we didn't test them. We didn't do any of that. They absolutely lied and said none of them did back at the time. They came through Seattle when they came home, and that was in October. And you'll notice they say October 18th, 2019 through January 21st of 2020. That's a red herring. These people were back long before. The first cases of COVID, if these athletes contracted COVID in October, it was likely spreading in Wuhan before October of 2019. And there's also some evidence from some blood supply in America that says it was quite a bit before October because other people traveled to and fro. But 7 people, they flew into Seattle. Imagine those 7 people coughing and hacking, coming in on a plane with 200 other people or something. And Seattle was one of the very first places that had the spread. So the information, we're not only learning new things, we're going back and finding out what they never told us. And that, I think, is very important.
God, no, you just hate the government. I mean, I literally hate the government.
Well, it's
Yeah.
Julia and Shelley have been having their. Julia says, "Have I mentioned today that government is a Ponzi scheme?"
Yeah, really, it is.
Yeah, I mean it's true, and like money laundering. I think what Shelley said is great. Money laundering agencies. I'm going to start calling them MLAs. They're not multi-level agencies. They're money laundering agencies. So MLAs. That's our government for you.
Jenny's on an acronym roll today. I'm going to have to get a little cheat sheet on these because I like them. Okay. Is it possible for me to share my screen now? I think you have to do that on your end.
I do. Do I?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Well,
hold on.
You got to click the one for her to.
Okay. Hold on.
Okay.
All right. Is that it? Did I do it?
Okay. You got it.
All
Okay.
right. All right.
So I'm going to take just a minute to go back to a January article from Visit, where we talked a little bit about Lyme disease. This is all very related. In these vector-borne illnesses, you're going to see the origins are very similar. And we really broke down about the Lyme disease epidemic and the government's role in the Lyme disease epidemic. And one of the quotes here is that that epidemic was a slow motion replay of the COVID pandemic, in that they funded and created illness. They covered up the origin of it for a very long time. They limited treatment options. They let patients suffer for years. They persecuted ethical doctors who were really trying to treat these patients. They funded bogus cover-up research. They controlled all the reporting data through money. They dismissed long-term symptoms. And then it's just repeat with the next pandemic. And I thought that was really important. So for those who don't know, please go back to this article. We're not going to spend a ton of time on it today because I want to talk about what's really happening in Oklahoma. But we talk about the emergence of Lyme disease. And in New England, which was the epicenter, people talk about this openly because they've been living it since the 1970s. So in the 70s, in Lyme, Connecticut, which is right on the southern shore of Connecticut, this mystery illness came up. They thought it was some form of juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. So if you were a kid up there during those times, it was a very scary time. They thought something was happening with kids. So they call in Yale School of Medicine. They did the researching. They identified that these kids had these target-shaped tick bites on them, a lot of them. And they got down to the fact that this was a tick-borne illness. They originally called it Lyme arthritis because they still thought that it was some form of arthritis. And then they found a bunch of adults that had it also. So it was no longer about kids. It was no longer arthritis. Something was happening. So if you look at Lyme disease here, this particular chart is from 2022, but you can click on it in the article and it shows you real time the spread of Lyme disease across the country. And you can see this is the Connecticut coast right here. Here's Long Island, that it just spread out from there. And it spread out quickly. So even though there's cases dating back to the 1960s now, we know, with symptoms, it wasn't until 1991, 30 years later, that the CDC began to recognize Lyme disease as a nationally notifiable condition. So there's always this massive delay in them saying that this is really happening. Don't believe your symptoms. Don't believe what you're seeing. Okay. So they dragged their feet for a long, long time.
Wait 1 second. Something just hit me while you were talking. So, you know that I worked for the state health department for 2 years as an epidemiologist. I wasn't an EMPH. I didn't have a master's degree in public health or anything. I had a master's degree in biology, but I worked for the health department for 2 years and did tick-borne diseases and rabies. And it just hit me as you were talking. I wonder if the whole idea that these things, because not everything is a nationally notifiable disease to the CDC. Okay. Not everything is. They're just list of things that are. Some of them, I don't see how some of them are just like super infectious, like hepatitis A, for example, or staph that you would get as at a restaurant, that people get food poisoning from, that kind of stuff. But come to think of it, I wonder why, if some of these things like Lyme disease and some of these tick-borne diseases and some of these other ones, I wonder if they're nationally notifiable because the government wants to monitor where it spread just because they know they released it, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's just part of their data
Smart.
collection.
Yes.
Yes. I as we move through, I feel like we're going to prove your case with that comment.
I'm the only idiot here that figured that out.
No, as we move through, that's an excellent point. So whether a disease is reportable or not is an interesting thing.
Yeah.
They won't have the states reporting things that they don't want to know about, but then they keep data on the other end. So this data is not coming from the states. And just like right here, it's not accurate and it's always underestimated. So I think they're keeping an eye on it, acting like they're keeping an eye on it, but they're actually controlling the data to underestimate the amount of cases about some diseases. And we're learning more and more that those diseases did not come from natural causes.
Interesting.
Okay? So in 2022, the CDC claimed that there were 60,000 cases of Lyme disease, but then on the same website, they sort of suggest, well, there could be 8 times as many as that. So their official number is 63,000, but yeah, we know there's a lot of people with symptoms, but you can't prove that. So sort of this cat and mouse game of not being able to prove it's Lyme disease really held up providers in diagnosing this and coming up with treatments. So we had decades and decades where we didn't know. So just very recently, Lyme disease has been connected to this bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi, which has been known since 1982 to cause Lyme disease. That's the bacteria that was inside the tick that was transferred to the human. And now, if we catch Lyme disease early, they give an antibiotic.
Well, can I interrupt? Just because I worked in the micro lab, it's a spirochete. It's not.
It's a spirochete, yes.
Yeah, and so a spirochete is actually an entirely different. It's a little animal, basically. They don't consider it. So sorry. I just
that's a really good clarification. And being the non-medical, this is what journalists do. We try to learn as quickly as we can, but those things are important because you're going to hear that later about spirochete. And you're
when
correct.
You see them under the microscope, they're called a spirochete because they actually have like a spiral tail. So they're very interesting. Anyway, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor White.
Sorry, what? I paid all that money to learn this stuff. I mean,
Professor White.
Hey, let me have my 2 things that I actually know.
Well, I know. I'm excited. I'm glad. I'm gonna have a new meme series for you.
That's fun.
Go ahead. Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. That was just
please do. Add all pertinent detail. We need it. So if you don't know about where Lyme disease came from, after World War II, our government brought a lot of scientists over to the United States in what was called Operation Paperclip. And those were Nazi scientists that there was a bit of a battle between whether they're going to Russia for punishment. You have to understand Russia lost 27 million people in that war, and they were quick to bargain to come to the United States. And we took some folks that we shouldn't have. So there is a U.S. Department of Agriculture facility out on Plum Island. And Plum Island is on Long Island, right across from Lyme, Connecticut, where the outbreak was. It started out as a military facility. It was a bioweapons facility under the watchful eye. So here's Lyme, Connecticut. Here's Plum Island. This is about a 9-mile shot as the seabird with a tick on it flies.
Wow.
The deer have even been known to swim the Long Island Sound. So just so you understand that. This gentleman's name is Eric Traub. He was just one step removed from Adolf Hitler, and he ran their biolab in Germany. It was also on a little island where he worked on just such things. just such things, dropping pathogens on troops as bioweapons. And he came to the United States. He was part of setting up that bio lab. Also, Fort Detrick had some things going there. He actually studied before the war on Long Island at the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research at Princeton. So we taught him all about pathogens. We sent him back to the Third Reich to use those skills. So he is directly connected to that lab. That he worked directly for Himmler, who was Adolf Hitler's second. And you can read more about this. There's so many books about this. This happened. There's so much documentation about this. I won't stay on it too long. But some of that
never learned
documentation,
any of that at the health department.
no mention.
They don't want you to know the real history, that the Nazis are running all the biological weapons in the United States, Jenny.
If you read, if you want to read books on this, one that I recommend is John Loftus. He was actually an Army intelligence officer, and they commissioned him to investigate Nazi war crimes. And he got unprecedented access to records that no one else saw because he was looking for something else, looking for Nazi war crimes. And he found all kinds of evidence. He's received information suggesting the U.S. tested some of these poison ticks, because that's what they were doing out there, stuffing these pathogens into ticks, on the Plum Island artillery range off the coast of Connecticut during the 1950s. Okay. Also, there's a book by Michael C. Carroll where he talks about these things at Fort Detrick and Plum Island, which it was called Fort Terry before it was the Animal Research Facility. So that lab was then turned into an animal research facility. They worked on hoof and mouth disease, which is another thing Eric Traub worked on about dropping onto enemy lines, was hoof and mouth disease. And now, in all their great wisdom with our government, they've moved that lab where they still work on hoof and mouth disease to Kansas, in the middle of agriculture and cattle country. So the likelihood of another outbreak happening is pretty big now.
Well, an outbreak in the food supply, because it was deer originally, and so many of us had moved away from, by that time we weren't using deer as a food source, right? But man, that is concerning, right in the middle of our food source. Ugh.
Yep. And it's open now. So the big smoking gun here is this thing called the Lone Star tick. So the Lone Star tick was originally indigenous to the desert regions in South Texas. Suddenly, in the Yale research that pinpointed what Lyme disease was, they were finding the Lone Star tick. They first found it on Long Island, and then they found it in Connecticut. It should not be there. You can read a little bit about that. One of the reasons it was used in research is that it's big and it's easy to work with in the lab. So it was first discovered in 1971. Imagine that. Right about the time Lyme disease was coming out, they started finding the Lone Star tick up there. Of course, the government blames that spread on climate change. They say they do. So this is,
oh my God.
This is the government.
But that's the beauty of.
I may have to disconnect.
But that's the beauty of climate change, though. I mean, it can be anything because it's nothing, right? Because it's nothing, you can make it everything.
It really is. So they track where the Lone Star tick is, and they use it as evidence of climate change. We're not sure if the Lone Star tick took a plane from Texas to Long Island to spread south because of climate change, but that seems like what's happening. And you can see, they're actually using it, tracking the tick as evidence of climate change. This is our government doing this. It's all in the article. And then
hold on just a second, because Shelley has a comment here. She said, Mary, thank you for sharing all of this. I fought what started out as a bullseye rash in 2006. The doctors here still don't want to understand. And she said what I said, climate change helps you get whatever you want out of anything.
So, and there are so many people that have suffered for so long, and this hasn't really gotten any better. So one sort of current example I would give you, for those of you who are fans of The Bachelor, which you probably didn't think I was going to say that, Last year, I think, in whatever the Bachelor series was, there was a young woman named Daisy. And she had a cochlear implant, and that was a big deal. It was, people were learning what cochlear implants were. But her story is that at 11 years old, she started having seizures, having all kinds of neurological symptoms. She was very, very sick. This got better, worse, better, worse. By the time she was in high school, and this is a very young woman. This is a woman in her 20s now. By the time she was in high school, she said she couldn't get out of bed. Ended up losing her hearing. Finally, after 10 years, was diagnosed with Lyme disease, and the damage was done. Had to go to Germany because she couldn't get the treatment. They did GoFundMe to send her to some longer term, more holistic treatments. And she ended up with the cochlear implant to restore her hearing. So this is happening now. This story in the comments is not, 2006. Still, providers aren't able to identify these diseases because they don't act naturally and the government is not giving them the information. So I thought it was shocking when I heard Daisy's story. I thought, people don't know this yet. How could she suffer that long? So just rolling on, you can take a look in the article. There's Bill Gates hates meat. And now we have the Lone Star tick associated what is alpha-gal, which is what we really want to talk about today. Alpha-gal syndrome is a novel and very unusual allergy to all mammalian products, to meat products.
Okay, well, let me stop you right there too and explain the word novel in scientific terms. So when scientists...
Go ahead, you describe it.
When scientists use the term novel, it means something new, something that has not been described previously in literature. So it's important, I think, to understand when they say novel and you read that somewhere, that's what that means.
Thank you. That's exactly. Brand new, wasn't here before. So the Lone Star tick is associated with this. So we're seeing one particular tick that's been used over in labs. There's documentation about it that is associated with these different pathogens, these different vector-borne illnesses that are moving in different directions across the country. So to say it's climate change doesn't really make any sense anymore. But alpha-gal is this hypersensitivity to a mammalian sugar that's called alpha-gal, thus labeled AGS, alpha-gal syndrome. And it was not connected to early cases of Lyme disease, but is now sort of a co-occurring condition for many Lyme sufferers. So some people get bit by the tick and they get Lyme disease. Some get both. Some get bit by this tick, which is always where it shouldn't be, and they only have alpha-gal. It makes people allergic to anything, particularly red meat seems to be the worst. And these folks did not have any problem with red meat before, after the bite. According to the CDC, and we'll get a little more into this later, there are more than 500,000 cases are suspected, though they're not confirmed. But the point here is there's been this strange global narrative wanting to get rid of meat and wanting us to eat less meat. And I just want to kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. So Congress, of course, funds to control the Lyme disease narrative, even as people suffer. And they will not investigate the origins. There's a really good book by someone named Chris Newby, and we'll talk about that a little more, that talks about this. There's a fantastic set of movies that talk about Lyme disease sufferers. They're called Under Our Skin and Under Our Skin 2, and they really track how these really good providers, just as in the COVID pandemic, who were really trying to help these people, were threatened. Their licenses were pulled. They were not supposed to treat this as Lyme disease. They were not supposed to try the things that were really helping these people long term. So, and this is a gentleman, his name's Willie Bergdorfer, and he actually worked for the NIH for years, he admitted pretty close to his deathbed to Chris Newby about stuffing all kinds of pathogens into ticks. And then he did bio research for a long time for the government out of Fort Detrick. But let me make sure we don't miss anything. So there's a really big tie here in the narrative between the government, academia, higher ed, the research money there, and the taxpayer money going through, and even state health departments, to keep the narrative what they want the narrative to be. You will track what we pay you to. You will say what we pay you to. And this is, or if you want to go listen to this gentleman, he works both for Yale and he works for the state of Connecticut on these funds. And those funds flow through to Yale for him to do his research. It flows through to the state of Connecticut Health Department for them to track what they're allowed to track. And in this way, across the country, they've controlled this entire narrative about Lyme disease. Okay.
So
there's a lot here. I'm not going to spend a ton.
Let me mention what I've told you before. So when I was working at the health department, so this would have been probably 93 through 95, I think, is when I was there, somewhere around that.
Okay.
And so like I said, I did tick-borne diseases, and I actually wrote a paper that got an award for tick-borne diseases in Oklahoma specifically. But it was interesting because I didn't really include much about Lyme disease, because we were told over and over and over again that Lyme disease doesn't happen here. And if people call in, with symptoms, or, there are providers who want to call in and talk about that, we're just to tell them we don't really have that here. So if you think about that, I mean, that happened, that was me, happened to me.
Yes.
And is something, specifically verifiable. So
it's still happening. We're going to talk about that. It is still happening at the Oklahoma State Department of Health. And I'll show you in the next article a very vague statement where they still don't even want to recognize Lyme disease when Oklahoma is being overrun with alpha-gal. So one more point that I want to make. The CDC resisted sort of like at first they resisted long COVID. They have resisted chronic Lyme disease as something that's ongoing. And we know it's debilitating. It affects the nervous system. It looks different in different people. There are neuromuscular disorders associated with it. The CDC sort of acknowledges a little bit that they're aware of lab-created pathogens and say these common etymologies for long COVID and other infectious-associated chronic diseases with tick-associated chronic illness. So they're saying COVID, which is created in a lab, acts a lot like these tick things that are happening in the US that were created in a lab. Yet now they're sort of blaming a lot of these long Lyme things on long COVID. So climate change and long COVID are becoming really convenient.
Our new scapegoats.
Yes. And just a last note about Lyme disease. They've gone through some pretty significant efforts to cover up Plum Island off of Long Island. So Senators Schumer and, I always say her name, Gillibrand, both from New York, out there on Long Island, went through something where at first they said they were going to sell off, the government said it was going to sell off Plum Island recently for development, and they jumped in and made sure that it never gets sold off. It's wildlife conservation, all of those kind of things. But there's a real protective barrier around Plum Island. And that's when they moved the facility to Kansas. It's now the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility. And it is in Kansas. So
if you put the word defense in there, it makes you feel better about it, I guess.
I guess. There's some interesting comments that I want to make sure that we don't miss.
Yeah. You want me to throw those up?
This is, yes, let's talk about them, because what's really interesting is in researching all of this, and now that we're getting into alpha-gal, I've been asking people across Oklahoma, do you know about this? And they don't. The long story is they don't. Some of them have never even heard of a mammalian allergy. So yes, right here, those with alpha-gal are sentenced to eating margarine and drinking plant-based milks, eating plant-based cheeses and meats too. Eating bugs would be safe. Sounds like a Bill Gates dream come true. Yes, it does. We're going to talk about that here in a second. That's an excellent comment.
Well, and then Shelley says they call it RA polymyositis cancer and then kill you with pharmaceuticals.
That is such a good point. We'll talk about misdiagnosis is a huge problem for alpha-gal folks. Some of them are having their appendix taken out. They're taking out gallbladders unneeded, surgeries because they cannot diagnose it. Excellent point. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about.
Oops.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to get in Becky's. It's so
Becky.
disheartening and infuriating that we're just numbers in their data sheets for taxpayer funded experiments to destroy lives and then gaslight us with this climate change thing. So, I mean, I guess the point is, and the good thing is the more we talk about stuff like this, the more people wake up and say just what Becky's saying, you know, oy vey, my government really hates me and is using my money to hurt me.
And that is the point, saying it out loud. And that is what's happening on the federal level for the first time. So for those of us who've been following these things, people are really waking up to government pathogens. And I don't know if you saw Bobby Kennedy's confirmation hearing in the Senate, but that's Bobby Kennedy on the left. That is Senator Bennett, from a Democrat from Colorado. Okay. And he badgered Bobby Kennedy about ever saying that Lyme disease wasn't a naturally occurring thing. So here was the conversation. You can link to the video, but this is what was said. Senator Bennett says, "Did you say Lyme disease was, quote, highly likely a materially engineered bioweapon?" I made sure I put in highly likely. Did you say Lyme disease is a highly likely materially engineered weapon? And Bobby Kennedy very calmly, because, you know, he has that low voice because of his voice condition, he said, "I probably did say that. That's what the developer of Lyme disease said." So Bennett didn't hear anything that he said and went right over him and said, "I want all of our colleagues to hear it. Mr. Kennedy said yes." So this was a big, like, Democrat gotcha point, except for all of the evidence is on Bobby Kennedy's side. He was talking about, when he was talking about the inventor of Lyme disease, he was referring to Willy Bergdorfer that we talked about, who worked, he died in 2014, and right before he died, he was interviewed by Chris Newby as she wrote the book Bitten, which was all about Lyme disease. And he was very forthcoming about what he was doing in the Fort Detrick lab for many, many years. She talked openly last year to Tucker Carlson about this. And what she said was, you know, she interviewed CIA Black Ops guy, who said that he'd been ordered to and did drop disease-injected ticks on sugarcane workers in Cuba in 1962.
Oh, wow.
This man worked from 1943 to 1969, Bergdorfer, at Fort Detrick. And he basically said what he did was stuff bacteria and viruses into ticks, fleas, and mosquitoes. That's what they were doing. He named them. He said rickettsia, which is responsible for Rocky Mountain spotted fever and Q fever, plague, Trinidad virus, relapsing fever, Venezuelan equine encephalitis, rabies, and a spirochete, as you pointed out, Jenny, that now we know is in the spinal fluid of multiple sclerosis patients. That to me was shocking. Is multiple sclerosis not a naturally occurring dysfunction in the body? We don't know how many people have suffered from that. So, of course, we talked about the government blamed climate change, but for all of the Lyme disease, but the Lone Star tick caused very different regional outbreaks. And now we're talking about alpha-gal. So alpha-gal spread very differently than Lyme disease. And we'll talk about that. At first, it was super prevalent. And there's a news article that said Suffolk County, which that's Long Island, home of Plum Island, had the highest rate of alpha-gal. And that was just 2023 that people are waking up to alpha-gal. But for some reason, the spread pattern is totally different. Alpha-gal seems to have started somewhere here in the Maryland area near Fort Detrick and has moved west across these states. So this is from 2017 to 2022. And you'll notice Oklahoma is coming into the danger zone of alpha-gal at that time. According to the CDC, alpha-gal cases in the U.S. exploded from 24 cases in 2009 to, they acknowledge, 34,000 cases from 2010 to 2018. So this is an explosion of cases if you look at the statistics. But the current estimates report more than 500,000 total infections have occurred. So now if we look at symptoms, I believe that number to be low when you start to consider things, because so many people don't know about it and are being misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
So it is here. And now back to that person's comment who said globalist talking points. I encourage everyone to go link to the videos in this article. This man is Matthew Lau. And Matthew Lau is still the director of the Center for Bioethics at NYU. He's been in a lot of the progressive universities, Oxford, Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, Princeton. Lau is connected to the World Economic Forum. You can hit a link in here and that will take you down all of that information. But I don't want to get into that because we'll get stuck, right? In 2012, Lau wrote a paper on the use of biohacking to solve the climate crisis. And it was featured in the Atlantic magazine. So the Atlantic magazine, say enough. I think everyone knows that that is where the leftist, particularly science talking points go, political and science talking
Piece
points.
of the globalists. That's what I call them. The mouthpiece of the globalist.
Atlantic is bad.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. In both the paper that Lau wrote and his interview with the Atlantic, he suggests humans could be modified to solve climate change. One of his strategies is medically induced aversions to meat. So that's 2012. In 2013, this is the strangest video. Please go watch it. In 2013, he gave a TED Talk. And TED Talks are about serious topics. This is not a comedy club.
Right.
He suggested that climate change leaves science no choice but to use human bioengineering to both lower the birth rate and perhaps reduce meat consumption.
So I'm just curious, is Lao Chinese?
Good question. I don't know. Well,
I think that would be really interesting to another really interesting vein of that research, because don't forget, our president was one of the first ones to come out and say, I'm not funding any more of these Chinese funded research centers at these big colleges. I don't know if they were at MIT or, Connecticut University. I don't remember where they exactly were, but I think we may have even had one. Am I wrong, Michael, at OU or something? I seem to remember, because I think that makes a difference. I mean, because the Chinese want to kill everybody but them, right?
He was born in Taiwan.
Taiwan. So. Interesting.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. People's personal backgrounds and family histories are important. Oh, someone else here looked it up. He's Taiwanese.
Yeah.
Oh boy, I love this audience. Can you all hang out?
Hey, I'm telling you, you don't put anything over on this audience, or if you ask them to do something, they're like.
Yep. And here's someone saying that they know 2 affected people in Bartlesville who are officially diagnosed. We're going to get to that. To Eastern Oklahoma is in big trouble. So anyway, at this TED Talk, Dr. Lau is saying these, purporting that we could make people adverse to, and he talks about we could put a patch on them, we could do something like that to make it where they would give up meat. And the audience is chuckling. They think he's kidding.
Oh my gosh.
He's not kidding. In 2016, he was on a panel here, and you can go watch this video as well at the World Science Fair, which is also known as the Davos of Science. This is where the globalists gather to plan all of their solutions for us. He promoted the inducement of meat allergies as a strategy for saving the planet, and he specifically mentioned the bite of the Lone Star tick. In talking about it, here's what he had to say. He said, people eat too much meat, right? If they were to cut down on their consumption of meat, then it would actually really help the planet, but people are not willing to give up meat. So possibly we could use human engineering to make it the case that we're intolerant to certain kinds of meat, to certain kinds of bovine proteins. And there's actually analogs of this in life. There's this thing called the Lone Star tick, where if it bites you, you'll become allergic to meat. I can sort of describe the mechanism. So that's something we can do through human engineering. He's on video. The videos were pulled down and now they're kind of come back up. So we're getting some truth spreading. Now, I will not say that these globalists specifically created this pathogen to do this, because the timing doesn't seem so, at least not the ones that are alive now. We know that these cases go back to at least the 1960s. Well, not so much alpha-gal. Alpha-gal kind of goes back to the 1990s. I can't really prove that, but it sure seems like they would love us all to be allergic to meat and would be willing to use a happy accident. So let's talk just a touch about what alpha-gal is and what makes it different. So we talked about how it's a reaction to this sugar molecule found in these mammal products. And it's novel, as Jenny said, it wasn't here before. And it is called an IgE response, immunoglobulin E. So you're going to hear that a lot about alpha-gal if you start to research this. It's unlike other food allergies in many, many ways, which makes us suspicious. First of all, it starts with a tick bite. Even the CDC, the NIH, admits now, we know it starts with a tick bite, and it started with the Lone Star tick. The CDC confirms that on their site. What happens is the tick has the alpha-gal IgE in it for some reason. It feeds on a mammal, then it transmits like a deer, and then the tick ends up biting a human. Later, that person, when they consume meat or mammal products, has a reaction. So this thing's very well mapped as to how it happens. But we don't have a whole lot of other cases of allergies resulting from tick bites. So this is really kind of different. AGE reactions are also unique in that they're delayed. So let me say this. If you have a shellfish allergy and you sit down to a big old crawfish boil with shrimp and all those kinds of things in it, before you get up from the table, you're going to know you ate something you're allergic to. It's within minutes a lot of times for people with food allergies. For some reason, alpha-gal sufferers, it's 3 to 5 hours before they start to feel those symptoms, which makes it really hard to connect it to what you ate earlier in the day. Researchers feel like this sugar is absorbed from the gut in a form that enters the circulation very slowly, which is unusual. So that makes alpha-gal stand out among other food allergies.
Well, can I mention something really fast? So
Absolutely.
another thing that I studied, that you have to study are immunoglobulins, which is what immunoglobulin E is one of 5 immunoglobulins. And the interesting thing about immunoglobulin E is that it's often found, it's mainly found in gastric and mucosal secretion. So if you come up against something that you're eating or that you're digesting, you're going to get this. If there's something in there that IgE is sensitive to, that's where you're going to get it. So it's kind of interesting that way. I mean, the whole thing is so, I'd say, kind of grossly interesting, because you can learn basics on this just in a college virology class. You know what I'm saying? And these people study and study and study this, and you can see how they would end up going, oh, isn't this so interesting? And then all of a sudden it turns into, because they get money for it, because they find it interesting, well, now we can use it against people for this particular purpose. You can really see how this happens with scientific people. Sorry, I just found that.
No, that's an interesting insight. And honestly, beyond what I've seen here with IgE, I had no idea there were 5 of them. And what you're saying about this particular one fits so perfectly with what patients experience with this particular syndrome. So another thing that's really interesting, there's a lot of research about this particular antibody, this alpha-gal antigen. And you can click to the research here that primates, humans, apes, and old world monkeys are known to have antibodies to this particular thing that represent a major transplantation barrier between primates and other mammals. So there was already something in nature stopping this kind of thing from happening. Yet in the case of alpha-gal, it was overridden. Something happened, something changed. And then alpha-gal is extremely, like Lyme disease, difficult to diagnose. They can suffer all kinds of symptoms. It can look like IBS. It can look like arthritis. It can look like cardiovascular disease, a mast cell disorder. So mast cells are white blood cells that are part of your immune system. And that's not a common sort of disorder to have, but those are showing up. People who work in agriculture have their illnesses that are specific to agriculture because they have so much contact with animals. It's really hard to pull this apart. And there are nervous system disorders, mental health effects of alpha gal that sort of put it all over the place. A provider who didn't have knowledge about alpha gal would not be able to put those pieces together.
Well, and let me also add too, because I remembered all of this stuff and I was going back and looking at it, and it makes it even more sense what you're saying, that it's bioengineered from this. So I told you there are 5
Right?
IGs, and they all have different functions in the body, but they're basically neutralizing weapons against antigens that get into your system, or bad things that get into your system. But listen to what they say about IgE. It makes up less than 0.01 of serum antibodies. Even though it's present in the lowest amount in the blood, it has a shorter lifespan. It is the most effective antibody against parasitic infections, including helminths. And I think that's really interesting because remember, I pointed out that a spirochete is not a bacteria. It's a tiny animal. It's a little animal. So IgE would be a response because it's like a helminth. It's like a parasite, and your body would see it as that because it's not a bacteria. It's actually a little animal. So I think pretty
Wow,
much
what you just
what
said,
you're
the super glue that he pulls this together. It
saying. Now
really
say
is.
that
That
again.
piece of information is.
You fell
Oh, I'm
out just a
sorry.
minute. Say it again.
What you just said is really sort of the super glue of information that ties this all together.
Well, it makes it make sense, I think.
For me, it certainly does. So when we say it's difficult to diagnose, there was a study that found here recently that the average alpha gal syndrome patient suffers for more than 7 years before they are appropriately diagnosed, if ever, and they endure many unneeded treatments. You can link to some of this information if you think you know someone who's suffering from these. Many had their gallbladder or appendix removed due to an earlier misdiagnosis, only to have the symptoms. And the common skin prick tests that they use for allergies are notoriously unreliable for some of these specific mammal food allergies, animal food allergies. So providers that are unaware of alpha gal wouldn't know to administer this very simple blood test to accurately diagnose alpha gal. So it's just not happening. And another complicating factor, someone just commented here too, that sort of alludes to this. There are a surprising number of items, pill capsules, gummies, some vaccines, some contact lenses, just as examples, contain collagen, gelatin, dairy, or other mammalian ingredients. And some of these, just like any other allergies, for some people, the reactions are much more severe. Deadly anaphylaxis has occurred. For others, it's much lighter and harder to pinpoint. But there are cases that even inhaling meat fumes can cause a reaction from an alpha gal sufferer, which I find fascinating.
Okay, so hold on just a second.
Then,
Lisa has checked me up, and my memory is bad, and she said spirochetes are spiral shaped bacteria. Lyme is treated with doxycycline, which is an antibiotic, and she's right, that's true. And so is I'm going back to look because rickettsia. So this is what happens when you think you know something. But I did look up about IgE, so just to make sure. Because I was sure there was one of them that is not an bacteria, but that was See, I thought it was rickettsia. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm probably wrong. Go ahead. But Lisa checked me up and I was wrong. It is a bacteria. Uh-oh. Where did she go? Oh no, she fell out. Okay, so I'm going to go while I'm waiting for her to get back in. I'm going to see what Gracie said. It took my son over 15 years to be diagnosed with alpha-gal. They removed his gallbladder. Oh my gosh. He's already lost his appendix. He finally asked to be tested. Tylenol is a big no. His symptoms are severe vomiting and stomach pain. I wonder what happened to and then and Shelley says doxy is not prescribed long enough. Isn't syphilis a spirochete? I'll have to go back and look that up because now I'm not sure.
I was gonna say, what
Now
happened to Mary?
Now I'm questioning everything since I got that wrong. Lisa said, imagine your life eating only veggie burgers, watching it down with a glass of almond milk. Your potatoes have, I can't believe it's not butter on them. Nobody will remember that except us old people, Lisa. Your BLT is made with fakey baking. Your plate of ribs are actually impossible ribs made from genetically modified soybeans. Your dessert is soy good ice, not cream. No more steak, no more burgers, no more red meat of any kind, no more milk or butter or cream. And I do think that because remember, the climate idiots, morons want to tell us it's cow farts that's ruining the climate, right?
Jenny,
So this,
I know you're only a biologist.
Apparently I'm such an old biologist. I'm not one anymore.
But as far as I can tell, the ice has been melting in North America for what, 20,000 years or so?
Well, we had an ice age. Anyway, go ahead.
I mean, the major glaciers. I mean, we were literally what, half covered in glacier United States 20,000 years ago? I mean, that ice has been melting for a long time. So,
yes. Well, but people don't remember. I mean, people don't really get good science in school anymore, obviously. So they don't know things like that just in recent, history, geological history, that there was an ice sheet that came all the way down through Kansas and came into Oklahoma, and they don't remember that. So it's, it's tough. Okay. So I'm going to add Mary back in. What happened? Did they cut you off, Mary?
I don't have her audio up yet.
Do you have your audio up, Mary?
You were just buffering for me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but it was kind of going wackadoo there for a little bit.
I can hear you, but you're buffering. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. We can hear you fine.
Uh-oh. Her internet.
I think it's your internet. Oh, no. Well, we're going to hang on and wait till you get back with us. I'm going to go back and read some of these. Julia had said it straight out of the pit of hell. I mean, well, who else really causes all the trauma in this world? Look up China, Ukraine. Well, that's interesting. This is so obviously stupid. It would have been so easy to claim infected ticks hitched rides westward on unsuspecting travelers' clothing and luggage. This is just another way to pound climate change into everyone's brain. I do think that that's true, but I also do want to point out that ticks, just like any other insect or animal, there's a certain range that they can stand in terms of climate themselves, right? And I mean climate. So if, like, you're not going to find Rocky Mountain spotted fever, or you're not going to find the ticks with the little white dots on them, the Lone Star ticks. You're not going to find those in Montana, I wouldn't imagine, because they were, originally from a very arid area. So even if they were to hitch rides on things, if they don't end up in a place that is climatologically suited for them, then they can't grow.
Climate
And
is changing so radically, Jenny, that they're just world travelers now.
government has to steal from everyone else in order to exist. Surprise, they're not our friends. Yeah, yes, this is this is true. I'm so sad about our friend
Okay, am I
Mary.
back?
Are
Am I
you?
back?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. I have no idea what was going on. You started buffering to me and I got thrown off.
How bizarre is that?
Yeah, and I have a strong Wi-Fi connection. I have no idea. I have no idea what's going on. But if you want to go back to sharing my screen,
I can't. Oh, there it is. Okay, I found it. It went away when you went away, or at least I couldn't find it. Okay.
yes, it was
All
so
right, go back.
strange. But
I know the
I
whole thing.
apologize. I have no idea what that was. Someone doesn't want us to talk about Alpha Gal. Uh, one jumping back in, another unusual thing is that Alpha Gal was sort of discovered. This isn't something that was there all along. It was definitely novel because it was discovered in 1989. Two scientists in Athens, Georgia, presented evidence to the CDC of a delayed allergic reaction to meat associated with the tick bites of the Lone Star tick. But they presented it in 1991, and CDC never made it public. Then this is really bizarre. Two pharmaceutical companies, actually, one was a development lab and a pharmaceutical company, Bristol Myers Squibb, were conducting a clinical trial for a drug for colorectal cancer. And as they did the trial, people across a swath of southern states were having this weird hypersensitivity to it. Some of it fatal. Some people died in this, right?
Really?
So, yes. And it wasn't happening in other places around the nation. So this was really, really odd. Instead of holding back and figuring it out, they rolled out the drug 2 years later, which is crazy to me. And they saw more widespread anaphylaxis, this response to the drug in those areas. So they dug in with some research. They found out about that IgE antibody was in those patients before they were exposed to the trial drug. And those patients were connected then to bites from the Lone Star tick. That's how we even know that alpha gal exists.
Well, I was going to suggest that people who are watching that have friends that think they might, or know somebody who think they may have this, it seems to me like the easiest way to get diagnosed, at least to start a diagnosis, would be to go and have your healthcare provider check all your IGs, your IG levels, because if your IgE is way high, it should tell you, because of the fact that it makes up only 0.01% of all the IGs, all 5 of them, then I think that would be probably a pretty good diagnostic first step.
Absolutely. And that's the step that's being missed. They're not doing that really simple blood tests. So here's the part Oklahomans really need to be aware of. And this is the part that stopped me in my tracks. There was a military study. This was just last year. So this is newer data than the CDC is going to give you, that did just that, Jenny. They tested blood samples from 3,000 military recruits. So these recruits are from across the country. And this is the map. They looked at their home zip codes and they mapped those that had that high IgE response. If you will take a look at Oklahoma, particularly eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas up into Missouri, we are now the epicenter. It started over here. Wow. It spread this way through 2022. And now of those recruits, almost half.
Yeah, 47%. Wow.
Had that IgE. So the interesting thing is, this is kind of like other allergies. They get bit the first time, it flares big time. If they avoid getting bit again, there is a chance over years that the body could then, you understand the allergy thing better than I do, sort of desensitize to this. If they get bit again the second time, the reactions are more severe than the first time. So there could be some people, and you've got to think about this study as 3,000 young, healthy people, right? And probably people joining the military that spent time outdoors. That area of the country, they may have grown up in agriculture. They might have been those kind of people, hunting, fishing, that kind of thing. So it makes sense. And they're young, healthy immune systems that they could be walking around with this and have suffered earlier in childhood with some things that no one ever knew were alpha gal and are now joining the military. But this to me was shocking. So you would think that if the map looks like this and Oklahoma is the most likely place to get alpha gal, that our State Department of Health would be spot on it, right? So first thing that we did, I mean, the CDC does say, it's old data, it's up to 22, that 65 of Oklahoma's 77 counties have cases of alpha gal confirmed. Those are the ones we can confirm. 29 of those counties at the time had among the highest rates in the nation of alpha gal. So we've known this for a while in Oklahoma. The State Department of Health website, if you search alpha gal, as we did, will tell you it's not even a topic. Not only are they not tracking it, it doesn't even exist in their world.
Wow. Get rid of those guys. I mean, honestly, they all need to go away.
It really makes you question. So then you start looking, and we did find related Lyme disease. Our State Department of Health is still sort of questioning. They've got this vague kind of thing as it's controversial about whether you can get Lyme disease in Oklahoma. At this point, I know people in Oklahoma that got Lyme disease in Oklahoma. If you're an outdoors type person who hangs out in those environments, you know someone who's gotten it. So we're not supposed to believe it, but that's up there on their site.
Yeah, but don't forget, I said when I was working there in, the early 90s, that they said that.
This is their line, and they're sticking to it. There's no line. So I actually called and got our state epidemiologist, Julianne Stone. She's one during COVID. They rolled through a few state epidemiologists. That was a hot seat. And she was the last during sort of the epidemic, and she stayed. And I got her on the phone. She answered her phone. So I started asking her all kinds of questions about alpha gal. And she stopped me in my tracks. Are you a journalist? I can't talk to you. I can't answer any questions about the health of Oklahomans or anything else. Nope. And I even pushed her. I was like, why? Why can't you talk to me or whatever? Nope. You got to get in touch with our official public information officer. So couldn't get her on the phone, lo and behold. So
FOIA all her emails. Why don't we just send in a request and open records all of her emails for how many years, Mary? How many years of emails do we need to get from her?
Well, she came in during the pandemic. So if I even had 4, I'd be ecstatic. It would be an incredible 5. That would be an incredible read. And this is the public information officer is Erica Rankin Riley. And I sent her these questions. It's very interesting, the answers to these questions. Is the Oklahoma State Department of Health tracking alpha gal? Is there any data you can share about the presence of the disease in the state, either currently or over time? And she says there's no alpha gal surveillance ongoing with the current tick surveillance program that we are developing. So what she's telling us is they're developing a tick surveillance program, but it's not going to include anything about alpha gal, even though we have an epidemic specifically in Oklahoma. And then she refers me to the CDC. CDC is the keeper of the narrative, and that's the way it's going to stay. So I asked, when was the first documented case of alpha gal in Oklahoma? Is there any information you can share about the origin of the illness? She says, since it's not reportable within Oklahoma, that means required to be reported by patients, physicians, hospitals as they encounter it, we wouldn't have an answer for this one. Okay, 0 information. Are there any available agency resources for Oklahomans suffering alpha gal syndrome that I could connect them to in the article? Best source is the CDC. Okay,
so the experts at the CDC. God, yes. This is literal insanity.
Well, the government's only going to refer to the government anyway, because the government is the. Yeah.
So then I thought to myself, if they're not tracking this, what are they tracking? Why are they not tracking this? It doesn't make sense. Follow the money. They get $441 million grant for this specific thing. They have a $441 million grant to track such things. First of all, you have to understand that the State Department of Health, and this was their 2023 budget review, by the legislature, they received $541 million from the federal government and then only $62 million for the state.
Only.
So who is their Lord and Master? And who is telling them what they should and shouldn't study, what they should and shouldn't track? It's clearly the federal government. They're currently receiving funding under 8 multi-year federal grants totaling more than $713 million. And if you look at that money, most of it, $441 million, is in this HHS CDC grant that is supposed to, quote, enhance the capacity of public health to effectively detect, respond, prevent, and control known and emerging or reemerging infectious diseases, including, quote, vector-borne diseases carried by a tick, right? Again, their goals are focused to reduce morbidity and mortality of infectious disease threats in the state. Great. We've got $441 million. Let's go. Let's track alpha-gal. No. Why are they not tracking alpha-gal? So here's the grant, essentially. This is Oklahoma State Department of Health. They've already gotten $181 million of the $441 million. They've already pulled those funds. And you should know, initially, these funds had to be applied for. This grant started in May of 2019 was the deadline to apply. Go back to May of 2019. We're getting ready to go into a pandemic. It's a 5-year grant, and it was on the basis of everything I said. You can chase vector-borne illnesses, you can chase infectious disease, whatever's ailing Oklahomans, you can go after it with this money, right? Originally, they were allocated in mid-2019 for Oklahoma $1.8 million, okay? The funding pipeline was there. It was ready. It was in place, ready for just such a pandemic. So then, immediately, the allocation went up from 1.8 when we get into the spring of 2020 for Oklahoma to $441 million, okay? So COVID hits and they add to this funding stream all of that money. And then they do another thing. They make almost all of that money. Do you see COVID obligated? Now, $432 million of it now, instead of going to everything else that's wrong with us, has to go to COVID. Of the 400. Even now. So you see this little gap right here of, yeah, here's the money you can use for everything else. That was just allocated last year. It's like $4 million that was just allocated last year for other stuff. But this amount here, the 441 million, 432 has to be associated with COVID. There's still 2 years left on this grant. So you can expect to hear a lot about COVID from the State Department of Health and very little about alpha-gal, because that's what the money is making them track. They're not going to track this disease. So now let's look at what the heck are they tracking at the Oklahoma State Department of Health. So their state health assessment, the last one we have, this is the report about what's going on with Oklahoma and health that they have to put out every year. It focuses on social determinants of health, adverse childhood experiences, and health equity. The report claims health equity relates to social justice in health, okay? Now, why are they doing that? Because they're getting another $43.8 million in federal grants to address, quote, health disparities among populations at high risk and underserved, create a statewide vision for health equity. They're being paid to track health equity, not actual disease. So they're ignoring alpha-gal. Within that report, this is the first graph in that report. This is your first scientific data in that report.
Just call it data. It's not scientific, but call it data.
Yes, it's so this is a health equity map. They are being controlled by federal government money. Now, when you look at their annual report, so they also put out an annual report, they actually publicly acknowledge, and again, this is 2023 coming out of the pandemic, they publicly acknowledge they've got a problem. They're chasing grant money and everything they're doing is about grant money, and they promise us an agency culture shift. So they basically say many of our programs receive federal grant funding, which comes with requirements. However, our focus remains leading Oklahoma to prosperity. So to do so, we recognize we must put them above federal grant requirements. Therefore, we've adjusted organizational procedures, blah, blah, blah. We are changing the playbook, says Commissioner of Health Keith Reed. That was in 2023. They still have not acknowledged the alpha-gal epidemic. So Mr. Reed appears to be more of a bureaucratic fixture. He is 20 years at the State Department of Health before he was nominated by Kevin Stitt in 22 to take that position. He served as both the deputy commissioner and the interim commissioner for the agency. This is a bureaucrat who made us promises that he wasn't going to prioritize the federal priorities and has not done so. Okay. While the annual report omits anything about alpha-gal, it is obsessed with syphilis surveillance through its sexual health and harm reduction service program. Why? Because it's paid $14.7 million by an HHH grant to do that. And here's the most bizarre thing. Of that $14 million, which is for sexual health and harm reduction, 7.2 million must be COVID obligated. It says right up here, it's STD prevention. So now, if the federal government wants to make COVID a sexually transmitted disease, the State Department of Health in Oklahoma is going to say, okay, for the money, we'll call it that.
This is just laughable. It's laughable.
It is. And in the meantime, people are truly suffering with this syndrome and they can't get a diagnosis. So you kind of go to the federal level and you can see the pushback. Congressman Jefferson Van Drew, he's a Republican from New Jersey. He recently put up a bill to force the CDC to recognize alpha-gal as a major food allergen, which does certain things. It gets the funding going. The bill, 31 co-sponsors jumped on because it's important to the people in their state. They're seeing this. The bill is sitting in the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Have no idea why it's in Energy and Commerce, but it's shelved. It's not going anywhere. Then we see in Missouri, a state representative, another Republican, Matthew Overcast, has introduced a state bill that would add both Lyme disease and alpha-gal syndrome to the list of mandatory reportable diseases in Missouri. The bill is sitting, at least in the right committee, Health and Mental Health Committee, but it's going nowhere. So there is incentive to not recognize alpha-gal syndrome. And one can't help think that it has to do with federal origins of the disease.
Well, I mean, I think I've said this before about just, the couple of years that I worked at the health department. I was there during the time that we decided it was imperative that we give children chickenpox vaccine and then make it a requirement for them to attend school. It was the same thing with hepatitis A. You had to have a hepatitis A vax for that. And, just from my personal perspective, the pharmaceutical people were there all the time pimping this stuff. And everybody who is rational realizes that healthcare isn't about your health anymore. It's about how many pharmaceuticals they can sell you once they determine that your health is poor, so that then they can get you on all these pharmaceuticals that are not going to help but cause you to have to take more pharmaceuticals. So it's none of this is shocking. It's just, I think people, and I also saw it during COVID too, because remember I was mayor at the time, and I would look on the OSDE or on the Oklahoma State Department of Health website, because they constantly had, they were pulling up this data on, who was getting it, where it was, and that kind of thing. And none of that data ever made any sense. And as a matter of fact, the Oklahoma County Health Department and the Oklahoma State Health Department, and I've forgotten exactly what it was, but they were doing something. I mean, the Oklahoma State or the Oklahoma County Health Department was trying to get businesses to shut down and make people wear masks over all of this data. And I got so mad about it, I contacted Governor Stitt's office, but then I didn't realize until later that apparently Governor Stitt's office was in it too, because of the fact that they were getting federal funds for COVID too. So all of this stuff, they're taking our tax dollars and screwing us in multiple ways. And one of them is our health. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Shelley says the chickenpox vaccine was my wake-up call. One child received it in my family. Shortly thereafter, all 4 kids had chickenpox. The worst case, the one who received the vaccine.
Wow.
COVID being sexually transmitted means fewer people will be wearing masks at least. And she also said social justice and healthcare. Which circle of hell did Dante pull that from? STD prevention equals stop LGBTQ. There's some of that. Gracie said this is totally ridiculous. There are several groups on Facebook for folks with alpha-gal. Also, Amazon sells several alpha-gal cookbooks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's obviously affecting many people. But the government is pretending it doesn't exist, basically.
Well, and the most dangerous thing about that is if the government doesn't recognize it, the medical community is not informed about it. They're not even aware of it. And then they're unable to diagnose. But, I was driving down, the crosstown, I-40, south of downtown, one day, and I noticed several billboards about syphilis that had to do with the State Department of Health. And I thought, this was right before I started researching this. Wow, we must have a huge syphilis problem. So they really have this ability to shift your focus and think that the small things are the big things, and that the big things don't exist, which is really scary. And she's right. So one of the things to Gracie's comment, in one of the studies that I read associated with this, when people were properly diagnosed with alpha-gal, it wasn't from a provider's information. It wasn't from anything else. It was because they went onto the internet and researched it for themselves and went and badgered a provider to give them the appropriate test that the provider wasn't even aware existed. That shocked me. It was part of the study. There's a link in there, the one that says it took people over 7 years to be diagnosed, which is crazy.
Like Shelley says, if I personally know 2 people in a town of 35,000, how many are there really? And I know, one of my friends, her mother, and it happened to her a long time ago. Several years ago that she got it, and she has it so bad that she has to carry an EpiPen because, like you said, wow, you have no idea. It could be in the gelatin capsules that you're taking, and it's awful. And it really just irritates me so badly that we've got this State Department. And don't forget, the State Department of Health is the one that was accused of and actually found, I believe Cindy Bird's office is the one who ferreted it out, that they had a $20 million shortfall, but it wasn't really a shortfall. They were just ferreting that money away into another account to be used for something else later. So I don't see that our health department, I don't see that. Certainly our Oklahoma County Health Department, from my experience during COVID, and certainly the state health department, from what you're reporting here, they don't have our best interests at heart. All they're doing is fetching federal dollars. That's all they care about.
Criminals. I don't even want to call it state health department. It's the state criminal health department. All the government is criminal. These people are criminals. They want us dead. They literally want us dead. They don't have any kind of, there's no protection for the people in any capacity. Like you mentioned that syphilis deal, Mary, you just popped it in my head. Remember the Tuskegee experiments, 1932 to like 72 or whenever it was? They're literally giving syphilis to a black community on purpose. The government is so criminal. And think about the same time. When I thought of that, I just thought of another. Remember when the government literally sprayed radiation on that town? I can't even think of what the town was, but that was the historical radiation, experiment where they literally sprayed radiation on this place for like 30 years just to see what would happen. Until people, it just completely infuriates me that the CDC, who's criminal, the NIH, all these government agencies, it's about one thing, and you hit it on the head, Mary. It's all about money, period. There is no health care in any of this. There's no promotion, and they control these doctors through insurance, and if you don't go along, they'll just pull your license and you're done. And, there's probably a ton of really good doctors out there and people that have skills like Jenny that can connect dots and say, yeah, maybe this and this and this, but you can't say it. You can't do it because,
well, and I
God.
want to point out something else about the whole syphilis thing, Mary, because this is another thing that you might even want to look at. So,
Okay.
Senator Bullard asked me several years ago now, I think it was right at the end of the COVID epidemic, to talk about the sex education in Oklahoma. And our sex education in Oklahoma is despicable. It's absolutely disgusting. You can go to our YouTube channel and see the interim study that I contributed to for the sex education. Part of the reason why they're pushing the syphilis stuff, the federal government is giving that money to states, and they're saying syphilis because if they scare people about what's going on with a sexually transmitted disease, they can push this sex education even deeper into schools than they already are. And the sex education that we have in Oklahoma, look at Tulsa. Tulsa is the worst, hands down. They teach you how to have homosexual sex because somehow that's going to avoid certain types of sex. They teach you how to use sex toys. These are all children. These are all people under 18. It's literally despicable. So again, you have the government really trying to ruin the population and the country. That's what happens when Marxists and communists get in the government. We all know that they've been there for years and years and years.
No, you're talking about these ideological ulterior motives to funding. And I'll be really frank. This is why, not just with the health department, this is with education, this is with everything else we see, our state officials, whether they're bureaucrats or elected, need to stop being federal funding whores, because not all funding is good funding. We see the same thing happen in education, where they want to grow their internal kingdoms and they see these big pools of money and they go after all of them, and they all come with strings attached. They all come with training. They all come with curriculums. They all come with these tools that they have to put in place against we the people to get that money. But to ask someone who's a director in some state agency to not apply for more funds that's going to give them more employees, more power, more reach, that's what's happening. They are federal funding whores, and it is not just health. We see it across the board.
And remember what Kendra said, Jenny, when she was on, since she does private and public accounting, and how insane that public accounting is, because if you don't literally outspend that budget, then it starts to go away. So they just come up with all this stuff to just spin it out of control to keep all that money in one way or another.
Correct. Right. You remember recently when everyone went after the State Department of Ed and Walters for not applying for money? That money's out there. That money's going to help children. How could you not? That is so neglectful. Well, there are reasons to not apply for funds, particularly when it comes to health and kids. So really look at that. Don't believe those narratives from the media that people are being neglectful when they fight back.
Yeah.
Gracie said, my son was diagnosed at an Indian health facility, but he still had to ask for the test. The reason he knew to ask was because his cousin had already been diagnosed and had the same symptoms. So after talking it over with the cousin, he decided he'd insist upon the test. And Lisa said, imagine never being able to eat at a restaurant at someone's house, being terrified of food in general, having to worry about anaphylaxis and EpiPens, and knowing your government had a hand in it. And this one's really interesting. Todd Rundgren was paid by California to write "Love is Infectious" for an STD campaign in the 1970s. I wouldn't doubt that even a little bit.
That is so interesting. I will be looking for that. Yeah, they're correct. And think about all the people in Oklahoma. There have to be thousands and thousands who are walking around without an EpiPen, and they're suffering from these things, and they don't understand what's happening. They're so at risk.
Comply and don't ask questions. They'll shut you down or throw human manure on your upstream neighbor's property. This summer, OHCA and OSDE are going after more Medicaid funding in schools for healthcare services. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Sarah, because I have, since, we changed our focus, I've been getting away from that. But yes, this whole idea of having healthcare in schools is all tied back to federal funding to do that. And the only reason to do that is because you can force all of this stuff on an unsuspecting populace of people who just keep their kids in school for one reason or another, and they just force this on them, and it's ridiculous. And you're right, Sarah, and we need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, you're also disempowering those kids instead of teaching them how to eat healthy, be healthy, exercise, the proper things to actually take responsibility for your own health. Now the school's going to be teaching all that BS and just total dependence on the healthcare system in one way or another. I just cannot stand it.
I saw an interview with RFK Jr. with somebody, and I don't remember who it was, but I died laughing because the interviewer said, so since we learned that the 70s food pyramid was basically just created for wheat farmer lobbyists, are we going to change that now and upside down it like it really should be? And he said, well, we're going to work on that. That's something we're going to try to, and it's like, people don't understand how pernicious government is in using our own tax dollars at deliberately harming us, either by putting propaganda in place or by doing what you just talked about, giving the health department so much money so that it can go and basically cover up a problem that they have by putting it into something. Really, honestly, at this point in time, I think there are always going to be the COVID crazies. I mean, we're always going to have those COVID crazies who are just that. I think, honestly, probably, I'm going to say a majority of people by now are understanding that all of that COVID was crap. It was just a way to screw over the election, keep people in their homes, isolate them from one another so that they could change the fabric of the United States, the whole way we did everything, and propagandize people. That was all that was for. So when they say, well, we're doing this for COVID-19, I would expect people to go, no, you're not.
Yeah.
We're not stupid. No, you're not.
But the other facet to that, Jenny, is the massive scientific push on the mRNA side, because now you've got that vaccine technology in one way or another that's going to infiltrate all the vaccines. They're already talking about mRNA technology in food and other things like that. And that was COVID was literally the only way to get the mRNA through, because for years, I mean, they've been trying for 10 plus years, all the animal studies, complete failures. Every single thing that they tried in the past was so catastrophic. That was the only way to get that into the mainstream in one way or another. I mean, it's just evil. It's literally evil, in my opinion.
But, to go back to what we talked about how crappy the standards are in Oklahoma education, really all over the country, but certainly in Oklahoma education, for science, for history, all that kind of stuff. People are so dense. They're just dense. And they don't get that when you don't talk about DNA replication in science, people don't leave understanding how DNA replication works. And so then they're like, oh, mRNA, that's part of DNA. Well, that has to be great. And they don't understand it's the reverse mechanism that actually makes it go into your cells. I mean, and change your genome. I mean, it's so frustrating, because I feel like there's always going to be a group of us, and they're the ones on here today commenting, and us, that understand that so much of what we're being fed is just complete bull crap. I mean, it's just bull crap. on our
And
tax dollars.
hopefully with COVID, we're now getting ahead of the linguistics. So, Michael, you just hit
Ahead of the linguistics.
the nail on the head as far as my COVID vaccine sort of decision process. So in 2020, it was maybe January, February of 2020, you started hearing people. This is before they did the shut down schools 14 days to stop the spread. You started hearing all over the place this they have an mRNA vaccine. They've had it in testing for 15 to 20 years. It's all ready to go. And so the narrative was so incredibly crafted. I happen to be super sensitive to when people start using words that I don't know and that I aren't in the normal vernacular. And I remember thinking, why is everybody saying mRNA? Like it's something like loaf of bread, like something we say normally. And I even have a sister who is in hospital administration, and she was on the phone with me saying, no, this is mRNA technology. I was in with a group of doctors. It's going to be perfectly safe. This was so early on. This was so ready to go. So what I did is I went and looked at exactly what Michael was saying. I still remember sort of the studies. I have sort of them labeled somewhere. And they tried it. They tried it on MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Virus. They tried it on RSV. They used several different viruses in different studies. They actually used ferrets on one of them. There were some monkeys in there. There were some rodents. And I did learn in that they actually use ferrets because they have reproductive characteristics that are very close to humans in that they have a placenta and there are things like that. Every single one of those studies ended with not recommended for human trial. This is me reading in 2020. And there's such a disconnect between they've got this, it's in the bag, they've been on it for decades, and this. And I also learned you didn't want to be one of those ferrets. Once they were immunized, and then they say exposed in the wild, it's really just they expose them to the virus. They couldn't maintain pregnancies, their placentas. There was a placental problem. And we're seeing that all over the country right now with this. So they knew all of this. Michael's completely correct. The emergency authorization, this entire thing was a way to put that platform into our regular lives and medical care. And it is incredibly dangerous.
Well, I'm looking for an article that I had saved because of the fact that it was a man, PhD research guy, who had been blowing the whistle on the NIH. And it was so interesting. And I wish I could find it. Here it is. Here it is. Okay, so I'm going to throw this up so that you guys can see it. I'm going to share my screen because I want people to go look at this and find it. It was such an interesting article because it okay, so if you really want to understand kind of what we're talking about here, go read this. This was from the Daily Signal, exposing NIH funded research, why I'm blowing the whistle on corruption. And I read the article and it was really fascinating because he says, corruption, fraud, and waste are not occasional lapses, but they're systemic failures, and you just have to gut the NIH and start over. But he basically says, now look at this. A widely cited survey in the journal Nature found that a staggering 70% of scientists surveyed reported failing to reproduce published research.
Yep, one and done.
Let that sink in just a second, because if you don't understand science and the scientific method, and we don't really teach the scientific method anymore, the scientific method is the procedure upon which you do all research. And the whole bottom line of that is, if you've theorized appropriately, if you've done your research appropriately, you can reproduce the results of your research study. You reproduce the results. Think on this then. If 70% of the research studies are not reproducible, what kind of science do we have out there? What kind is it then? It's something that somebody made up and some group paid for. And that's basically what this guy says, Isaiah Hankel. And like I said, please go find this article and read it, because it really explains to you when they say, what was their word, the phrase that they used during COVID, respect the science. Was that it?
Yes.
What was it, or something like that?
Trust the science.
Trust the science. That's right. You can't. What science could you trust that's 30% reproducible?
Yeah.
Right.
There is no science in any of this. This is 100. Look at the trillions of dollars printed out of thin air for COVID, and that's what it is all about. Besides controlling the population, in my opinion, in one way or another, but you have this money printing machine, and the government is in control of it, and they're just going to do whatever they want to do. In my opinion, the CDC, the NIH, all those agencies, they only exist because they create the problem in the first place. They create the problem that they already have the solution for, and then they're the good guys, they're the experts. It's total BS. It's Hegelian dialectic, 100%. All these agencies, the government, all of it.
Mm-hmm. And the state departments of health are just a downhill arm of it at this point.
They use tax dollars so that we're participating in this wickedness. But let's go chant and sing about our wonderful government. Sarah says the health department and CDC tell doctors Oklahoma is not endemic for Lyme, so they don't think to test for Lyme. And that's exactly the point that you were making, Mary, in the first place. That was the first thing that you were making, was if the CDC says it, then the physicians do it, right?
Exactly. We saw that with COVID treatment in the hospital. They were denied the treatments that worked because the one pager from the CDC says this is all you can do.
And given the one that was going to kill them, because the CDC said to put them on ventilators.
Yep.
Guess how we get on the CDC list? By getting more test results of Lyme. Government systems failure. We had months of testing and no answer for our health problems. Finally got Lyme testing from an independent provider. Wow. One of the RA mRNA drugs uses a Chinese hamster reproductive system. I'm not surprised. Wow. Getting all the 3-letter governmental agencies would benefit the U.S. immensely. My guess is only a couple might need to be reinstated. I'm not sure. They're super quick to debunk anything we may propose due to inability of replicating results, such as ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, etc. That's so true. Isn't that true?
True.
Well, let's just say, you hate to bring it up to all these government people and all these experts. We wouldn't be dealing with this whole Lyme disease epidemic or endemic or pandemic or whatever kind of demic you want to call it, if the government didn't create it in the first place.
Yeah, it's a bioengineering epidemic is what it is.
The government created it. They did it for whatever, bioweapon purpose, whatever. If they never did it, we'd never be dealing with that.
Correct. I think the laser beam of bright light coming through this dark cloud of government activity is in that we have this new administration. And when I see someone like Robert Kennedy Jr. finally ordering an actual real study about why we have an increase in autism in this country, I will sing hallelujah. These things are happening, and we're really hoping that we get to some of this truth and accountability.
But again, I want to know who he's going to put on the research. Is he going to put an independent lab that doesn't receive federal funding on the research? Because again, I think that's the other thing that we don't do. It's like what we talked about at the very beginning of this program before we pulled Mary on, is the fact that we don't have any common sense anymore. We don't have any critical thinking skills. So it's not like you could go, we go, RFK, yay, he's doing all of this stuff. Well, are we watching that? And if he's going, hey, CDC, look into this. Well, CDC's been the one who's been pushing forever the notion that there's never been any link to autism and childhood immunizations. So you can't have the fox researching the hen house.
Yeah, but at the same time, Jenny, a lot of that stuff, you go back to like Lyme disease. I guarantee you that was a black budget item. No one anywhere outside of probably a small group of, probably military people in one way or another knew anything about that for a long time. So who knows? I mean, literally, who knows what they have in the works constantly? That's just, I mean, we're talking, they're probably 20, 30 years ahead of us in these deals. That stuff now they're doing now that we're not going to know for 20 years.
It's
Or
true.
be affected by for
You know,
20 years. And
how
that's
are you
the
going to
scary
find that?
thing. Yeah.
How's a guy like RFK? How's a guy like RFK going to find a place like Plum Island when it was literally off the books, black budget? No one knew anything. How are you going to, a guy that good? How's he even going to find something like that?
Yeah.
Well, to me, it's really surprising how so many of these things are hiding in plain sight, because people in New England have talked about this forever. They call Plum Island, New England's Area 51. This has been common knowledge up there forever. Although you didn't really want to say it in certain circles because, again, you'd be accused of being a conspiracy theorist. But I would say, if I hear the President of the United States yesterday, in one of his many public statements that he makes a day, which is so refreshing, actually said, we're going to get to the bottom of autism. And he knew the statistics. He said 1 in 10,000 kids whenever, and now we're at 1 in 31 kids have autism. He said, this is unacceptable. That is so refreshing to have an executive branch who's going to recognize some of those things. So we'll see. I'm hopeful. It's definitely a time of truth. We'll see what fruit it brings.
Well, and this was interesting. It took decades for natural remedies to become okay for mainstream medicine. And I'll have to tell you, I don't believe that I'm sorry, Sarah, I don't think it's okay yet, because it doesn't matter what kind of natural remedy I use. And I got a great one the other day that is, and I'll have to put it up somewhere so I can share it. My DO recommended my naturopath to give me this stuff. And it was because I'd been having some kind of stomach thing for a long time. And she said she thought it may have been like an intestinal COVID, and this stuff is supposed to be a binder. And she said we used it all the time during COVID to kind of flush. It actually binds to the spike protein and gets rid of it. Well, son of a gun, that thing has worked like a charm for me. But I had to pay out of my pocket $75 for one bottle because the insurance isn't going to pay for it because it's a natural medicine, even though I can promise you that stupid thing has worked like a charm. I'm back to normal now after almost a year of having problems. I'm back to normal now. There's no way that wasn't what caused it, but you couldn't get the insurance to cover that kind of thing, or a regular doctor to cover that kind of thing, because they still go on what the AMA says, and the AMA still receives half of their funding from big pharma. So, I mean, all of it is just corrupt. The whole thing is corrupt. I'm trying to figure out what part of it isn't.
You're correct. There was a congressional hearing on a bill. It must have been a committee hearing on a bill the other day that I saw video of, where a lobbyist from Coca-Cola a lobbyist from the Heart Association was there to stop a bill that would prohibit people from buying Coca-Cola and sugary soft drinks on their SNAP. So the Heart Association wants people to still have Coke, Pepsi, those things on SNAP. What is that?
Well, I think it's obvious. I think that's obvious what it is. They want us to have all of this crap in our diet because they know it screws up our health, and then they can sell us a bunch of crap that's, supposed to make us better that doesn't. It's just, to me, it makes all 100% sense, and it all boils down to money. I get money if I do A, therefore I will not do B.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope today, if there are people that know anyone that's suffering with any of that range of symptoms, that they'll share the articles at V1SUT.com so that they can have some ammunition. It's linked to all kinds of information from other sources that they can take to a provider and get a simple blood test and start to get well.
Oh, here's the bottom line, too. Here's another bottom line. As Sarah says, a sick population is more easily controlled. So I think it's probably a two-pronged thing. It's money and control, because those are the most important things anyway. So I agree, Sarah. Also, don't forget, guys, if you haven't signed up at rope2.org to get the articles when I get them up, because if you'll sign up at rope2.org, the articles will come right to your inbox when I put them up. And after every interview, after every podcast we have, I put up, I edit the videos and I try to get those out, and then I add them to kind of a written overview of what we talk about in the podcast. And I always include Mary's URLs and the links back to her Substack. So if you forget where she is, just go to rope2.org and look at the overview of the podcast, and all of that information will be in there, along with the clips that you can share. And the clips go up on our YouTube account, and you can always sign up. And we've asked you to do this for years. Go to our YouTube account at Rope Report. And it's really easy to find if you go to YouTube. Just put in Rope Report and sign up. Because as soon as I release as soon as I upload a clip, you'll get a notification to your email box saying it's been uploaded. And then you can share it with people from there if you don't even want to do it through the website. So there are lots and lots of ways that when we put up this information, we give you plenty of ways to be able to share that. And we love you guys because you're so great to tune in faithfully and comment and that kind of stuff. And Gracie said Mary, she gets Mary's newsletter too. And if you go to Substack and sign up for V1SUT on Substack, V1SUT.com, you can sign up for Mary's newsletter and get hers as well. So
excellent. Thank you, Gracie. I can't say how much I appreciate the two of you letting me talk about this, because even the state epidemiologists won't allow that. And I think we started a conversation.
Oh, I think it's going to be, I think it's a great conversation. But here's the only problem that we have. Until we can get some more legislators, I'm not going to say some because we have some up there. Until we can get more legislators who actually have more concern for their constituents than lobbyists' money, we're not going to get any of our state agencies to do what we need them to do. And don't forget, when we had Cindy Bird on, remember, Michael, our last interview with Cindy Bird, and what is the thing that we learned out of that interview? She's like, I can do my job all day long, and I can go out and I can write you all of these audits down, and I can say, here's exactly what's going on, but we have no laws to make these people behave.
Yep.
So it's not like the AG, I mean, the AG could do something, but he's running for governor. So what is he going to do about anything? He hasn't done about anything that really amounts to anything to help the citizenry of Oklahoma. He hasn't gone after DHS. He hasn't gone after the health department. He hasn't gone after the State Department of Education for, the federal funding that didn't get done right. I mean, nothing has been accomplished here. So the only way that we can do that is certainly not vote for Drummond for governor. That's not going to help us at all, because if he won't do anything as AG, he's surely not going to do anything as governor. So we need to get a good governor in, and next year on those elections, man, we got to turn over some seats, because we've got to get people in who are willing to protect our liberty, and they do that by protecting our health and protecting our tax dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I would put a vote in for the people of Bristow and that district in the House. This Speaker of the House has got to go. He needs to be a one and done. The trafficking of legislation is going to harm Oklahoma more than we've even seen in the past.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have our, I guess he's almost a regular, even though he has his own Substack. Jason Murphy just recently put out, he literally crunched the numbers and found out that more Democrat legislation had gone through committees than Republican.
Mm-hmm. And Speaker Hilbert came back out on X and tried to defend it, saying, there are 20% of Democrats in the legislature in the House, and only 6% of the bills went through. And I couldn't believe he even stepped in it in such a way. If you look at those 6%, and that's not a true number, because what's happening is we have uniparty rhino legislators who are partnering with a Democrat to co-author bills, and then they're calling it a Republican bill. And they are some of the worst legislation we've seen.
Yeah, this has been hands down, I'll say it over and over again, this has been the hands down the worst legislative session I've ever seen, and Republicans are in the so-called majority. So, again, really refreshing to talk to Caleb Blount the other day, who's now chairman of the Oklahoma County Republicans, and, hear her talk about the fact that, we need to get people into the party who are going to understand and agree with our platform, not just get them in to get an R by their name. And yes, we have been overtaken by rhinos. And yes, he's only interested in furthering his career as far as what it looks like to me anyway. All right, we better get off of here because it's 2:05, and I feel bad for the people who are still on and are thinking, hey, it's Friday, I might want to do something. So let me say, Mary, who's going to be on Wednesday next week?
I'm going to be on Wednesday.
Again?
Yep. Yes, and we're going to be back to education and some things happening about our kids that are not safe in Oklahoma schools. So you're not going to want to miss that.
Well, we never want to miss any of the ones that you're on.
That's another ongoing epidemic, shall we say.
Yes, for sure. And then on Friday, Michael, you're going to be our guest, and your brother Mark. What are you talking about on Friday?
We're going to talk about, so Mark's going to talk about a little bit more on all the college stuff, and he sent me some pictures from a small little school down there around Houston that I want to show. I don't want to tell you about it yet. I want to show you the pictures and get your reaction. He just happened to be over there and he took these pictures. He's like, check this out. But we'll talk to him a little bit more because he went through the first Trump administration while he was a professor at Texas State. So we'll talk to him a little bit more. But I'm going to talk about some property rights that you don't ever think about and that are not in your sphere of just even comprehending what can happen to them.
So on my schedule, it says UCC because I couldn't put in uniform
commercial code.
I don't know why I forgot about the commercial, but that's what you're going to be talking about is the uniform commercial code.
Yep.
So you guys are going to want to be here for that because I didn't know about that. Michael is the one who enlightened me about that. Another reason I don't like Michael.
And it literally affects everyone that if you have retirement in any capacity, it's not necessarily your retirement.
Yeah. So we got to talk about that. So Mary, we love you. And so do all of the friends who have been on for 2 hours today. And we love you, friends, for being on for that long. But thank you, Mary, for bringing this to our attention because there were so many great things that I can clip out of this, this thing today. Really excellent. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks. I so appreciate you guys always letting me bring these issues to light.
That's what we're here for. Everybody, thank you, our loyal viewers. Thank you again for all of your comments. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. It's actually supposed to be beautiful. So if you've got gardening like I do to get out and get done, this is your weekend. Get her done. And we will see you again on Wednesday with Mary again. So have a great weekend. See you next Wednesday.